The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Mary Filardo here, and Sean O'Donnell is helping me. We are, of course, at home, so we're hoping that all of this technology works well. We want to welcome you on behalf of the National Council on School Facilities to a webinar and discussion about the CARES Act and what's happening going forward as Congress and the White House are exploring a new stimulus, what they're calling Stimulus 4. We're going to have, both an opportunity for me to present some of what we're hearing here for our state directors to provide each other and us with some input, and then we can, we also want to, do some planning going forward. So let me go ahead. If there are any issues, I see Amy has a question. Sean's going to be, working with the questions. And also, if you want to raise your hand, you can. You're muted by us, but Sean will be unmuting. So if you want to say something or ask a question, just raise your hand and Sean can unmute you. So as I said, today we're going to talk about the CARES Act and also the Stimulus 4, which for the most part is being talked about as an infrastructure stimulus, but there's both support and pushback on that. I wanted to share with you sort of who's on the call, because I don't think the participants can see it, and the states that have registered for the call, and many of them are here. We have a great representation and really appreciate the participation of folks. We also have a number of our industry partners on the call, as well as our research partners. And then we've got from VH Strategies, our longtime government relations folks, and then Bernstein Strategy Group, a newer partner, kind of working with us on some of the education side advocacy. So welcome everybody, and I look forward to our discussion. So on March 27th, was actually I believe the third stimulus, or kind of quick proposal that came through in order to address this amazing, crisis, frankly, that we are all in. And in it is $13.5 billion for K-12. And so we want to talk about that. That's the CARES Act, and that is law that exists. The next thing we want to talk about is, the proposal for a Stimulus 4. The president said, we wanted something really big, a $2 trillion stimulus package. There's both support and resistance kind of developing for that. But so what's in CARES? There's about $13 billion for K-12. There's $3 billion that the governors have for emergency education relief, but they can use that for school districts or institutions of higher ed, or both. And there's also about a $600 million pot, which my understanding is a competitive program at the Department of Ed for the education agencies highest hit by the coronavirus. I wanted to identify two other elements in the CARES Act because I think they might be used by school districts. One is from FEMA, and because it covers protective equipment, logistics, safety measures, and community services, and the schools end up in this territory pretty frequently when we have these kinds of kind of community-wide disasters. And the other thing is the $400 million for election assistance. And this, I think, is important because we know so many of our public schools are voting places. And to the extent that, as they say, they want to increase the number of voting locations, the schools would be on the hook for that, as well as making sure that they're, sanitized and cleaned ahead of the voting as well as after the voting, so they would be safe for children if the children are hopefully back in schools, and particularly in November. But we know we've got primaries and things also on the docket.
Hey, Mary. I want to disrupt you
yes.
with 1 second. I want to make sure everybody can hear. There's a few people saying they can't hear the audio.
Let's see. Is it that they're getting no audio, or that?
Can somebody write in chat if they can hear?
Daniel's saying that you can't hear.
I can hear, no problem. Ariel says I can hear. So it looks like most everybody can hear except for.
So Daniel, what about Dan?
And Shailene.
Yeah.
It looks like everybody else can hear. Okay.
Okay. So one of the things, we are recording this. So if you miss it the first time round, you should be able to hear it the next time round. In terms of what you can use the dollars for from CARES, they made it extremely loose. Basically anything that is already federally funded, IDEA, Perkins, career, that's the career technical, for homeless, for Native education, for adult family literacy, but also coordination, essentially for the distance learning. I think the area that the facilities fall into is primarily activities to maintain the operation and continuity of services and to employ existing staff. But in that, is the cleaning and other kinds of, higher level of maintenance of schools that might be required even after they're reopened. So how are they distributed? They're being distributed by formula to the states. And the states are required to subgrant 90% of their funding to school districts, which, from our state facilities directors, that's actually a 10% state share, which obviously you don't have to retain, but is a much higher share than typically done. And it might be that the states should be looking at whether or not there's some emergency measures they should be putting in place. They might be school facility inventories or assessments or other things that could be done at the state level that the dollars might fund if you retain 10%. Otherwise, obviously, the states can distribute, up to 100% if they want. The only other kind of allocative constraint is that you're supposed to, again, it's a supplement, not supplant, but there's waivers for this, and clearly nobody quite knows what that means, to try to maintain, the level of funding that you had pre, economic contraction, is nobody really knows. So I suspect that there will be waivers, many of them asked for and hopefully given if they're needed. What I wanted to do now, you have handouts with this. I'm not sure I know exactly how that works, but if for some reason you can't get them, there are handouts, and what I've included in the handouts is the Congressional Research Service estimate of the $13 billion, how that is allocated by state. So for example, you'll see they're not huge amounts. You've got, 350 million for California, but that's statewide and, 6 million kids. You got 30 million for Arkansas, Minnesota, 43 million. These are not Maine, only 9 million. But this was really just to give you a sense of that, and you can find in the handout a list of all of the states, so you'll have an idea of kind of what your state agencies are working with. You can also do the quick calculation on what 10% means. So, 10% of 48 million for Alabama would be 4.8 million the state could retain for issues associated with education, this sort of funding for the state functions. So what I'd like to do now is I'm curious, and we've got a couple of polls, but we'd also like to, unmute some of our agency directors. And one, we're curious if, oops, I didn't mean to do that. We're curious if you're looped into any planning for these funds that are just become available, whether or not you have started to estimate the COVID-related costs or savings to your districts. Like, do you know that your utilities are coming in less, or transportation? The gas costs. I mean, oops, I've got to echo. Are you providing ways for your local districts to track their expenses? A little bit like with FEMA, in order to get money reimbursed from FEMA, you gotta document it. You gotta, have your receipts. So kind of, are you providing some help to the districts to help them track that? And then related to learning loss and thinking ahead, how are you planning about that as it relates to facilities, both in terms of thinking about expanded summer programs or extended school year or day, and what are you thinking the implications might be for this? So that's sort of a set of questions. If Sean, if you can go ahead and maybe let's just do one of the polls. Let's just try it out, and if it doesn't, if it takes us too long, we'll ignore it. Can you do a poll, Sean?
Yes, so I just launched one.
Oh,
And,
interesting, because I don't see it.
right.
I don't know if other people see it. Oh, here. Okay. So what's the question that is being asked,
So
Sean?
is your state facilities agency looped into the planning for CARES Act funding for K-12?
We're seeing mostly not. About 2/3 not and 1/3.
That's 30.
Yeah. And our N is a little low, so it might be that we're looking at 3/4 are not and the quarter are. So what I'd like to do is have some folks talk with us a little bit about so definitely mostly, I guess we've got more folks that can vote, but why don't we can you go ahead and unmute
Yes, I muted Barbara. Let me unmute some of the facility directors here. Unmute.
Yeah. So do you have Barbara?
So yeah,
Barbara's
unmuted. I'll try to get Joe. No Joe.
Can we hear Barbara?
Melanie. Let's get Michael Elliott if you can.
Yep.
There's Mike Roland. Nathan.
Oh, there's Melanie. Hey, Melanie. I see she's unmuted. And Mike.
Bob.
Hi, Mary. This is Rob Olson from Iowa.
Oh, hey, Rob. So, are you in on the discussions about, what happens with the CARES Act?
At this point in time, let me get into a place where I'm out of the wind here just a second. At this point in time, it's a little bit early that I haven't been looped into that. I think, as you mentioned, there's more questions than answers right now. So at this point, I'm not been looped in, but what I can tell you is we have provided separate accounting codes for districts to keep track of their expenditures that are related to anything extra due to the fact that it's COVID-19. We are seeing, for instance, we have school districts that are using their buses and school transportation to deliver meals to students and families.
Yep.
Obviously, that's probably pretty common for a lot of people. And some of the other expenditures that we're looking for in regards to facilities and infrastructure would just be, how do we provide additional access to the internet and the Wi-Fi for what's coming, and that is that distance learning piece.
Right. And have you gone in and done extra cleaning and provided protective clothing to your custodians and building engineers?
Some districts have. I think we're currently here in Iowa, our schools are closed until April 12th, but we have a press conference again this afternoon. The governor's been doing daily press conferences, and today she's going to announce either an extension of that or to announce that school will no longer, they won't meet for the rest of the remainder of the school year is what I don't know what the announcement will be for sure, but it's going to be one of those two things, I'm sure. And so the purpose of the schools, while they have been closed, that's what the custodial staff has been doing, though, is doing the deeper cleaning.
Right. And are you seeing that as fitting within the current budget, or are people doing overtime and adding staff and materials that they wouldn't normally?
I think that just because it's deep cleaning, I would say that right now it's an additional expense. If they do not return to school, what I would anticipate it being is the same expense that they would have if they were doing something like that over the summer, preparing for the next school year. So right now it could be an extra expense, but in the long run, if they don't come back to school, like I said, it could end up just being the exact same thing they would spend otherwise.
Right. No, thanks, Rob. So I'm curious, Barbara Hansberry. So what are you seeing in terms of the projects that you're, and is your agency kind of looped into these discussions in terms of the schools and the Department of Ed, because you're a separate agency? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about Barbara's in Massachusetts at the School Building Authority. Can you hear Barbara? Barbara? No, can't. Okay. As I see that she's unmuted. What about Bob Gorel? Are you there? Where are you, Bob?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. Bob's in Maryland. Introduce yourself, and then.
Bob Gorel. I'm in Maryland. It's what we do know is schools are all closed down. We have many of the schools, and usually it's some fraction of the schools are serving lunches at the curbside for people to pick up. We've been doing deep cleaning actually over the last couple of weeks. I think it's pretty well done. Only in the more robust LEAs, those that we think the facilities are well maintained, in good shape, have they kept their maintenance staff working and they are considered essential. Both construction and maintenance of facilities are considered essential in Maryland per the governor's order. But we have a lot of the LEAs that are not doing maintenance on the facilities, and some that have shut down construction as well. We believe primarily because of just being they're being afraid of making the wrong decision or the wrong public fallback on them for moving ahead. And honestly, there's a lot of fear in the workers that are being asked to go to work because a lot of the safety equipment that are necessary aren't available. And so, such as changing filters and things like that, they're concerned with their health. So it's I think there's some clear messaging that has not yet developed.
Yeah, interesting. So Mike Rowland, are you there from Georgia?
I am here.
Yeah. So give us some information about what you're seeing in your state.
So the governor issued an executive order yesterday closing schools through the academic year. We had been closed down until April the 24th, but he extended that to take into account the academic year this year. Like you mentioned, and I think Bob mentioned, we do have school districts that are many, if not all, of our districts that are providing meals to as many students as they can. I'm sure that, in fact, I know they're using school buses to do that. We haven't experienced, as far as I know, a lot of school districts that have suspended construction activities due to this. In fact, the information I have on that is really anecdotal and somewhat sporadic in terms of the folks we can work with. But for the most part, I think the contractors have been taking precautions to address, the the CDC requirements for dealing with the virus. But those projects are pretty much continuing throughout this period. I personally have not been looped into the conversation, and I've checked with Pat, our director, and I don't think he has either, with respect to this money or any money that might be contemplated to be funneled to facilities. So that's pretty much where we stand.
Yeah, no, thanks. So Randy from Washington State, you all have been kind of out front on this, sadly. Can you share with us sort of where you all are?
Oh, sure, Mary. Washington schools have been closed since March 23rd, and they've been ordered to be closed through the 24th of April. They're going to evaluate this. That needs to be extended. Schools continue to be operated. The maintenance folks are still working as we've heard. School nutrition still running. They're still providing meals to kids under 18. So districts have set up drop-off sites that families can visit. Our school construction projects have been deemed essential by the governor. So our school construction and large maintenance projects are continuing, but they have to follow CDC, our Department of Health guidelines, and our Department of Labor Industry guidelines on social distancing, and make sure folks are safe out there. That's about it. Our superintendent's office has created a website for school districts where they can go to and collect information regarding how they continue learning during the closure, about childcare that they can folks can access, special education guidance, and they did a pretty good job, our leadership did, on preparing this website. So what I can do is I can forward that to you, the link, so that folks can take a look at it.
Yeah, so I can share that. That would be great. So I'm wondering, Michael, Elliott, and I see actually, Melanie, you had your hand up. Are you self-muted?
Yes.
Or can you? Melanie?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Melanie's here from Ohio.
Yes. And Ohio, our schools will remain currently closed until May 1st. We are continuing with construction because in the stay-at-home order, it was indicated as being essential. And so we sent out protocol to our contractors indicating, you know, the additional safety precautions that are expected, the social distancing, you know, asking the 3 questions, temperature, all of those things. Now, we have had reported back from some of our sites that some of the contractors are electing not to proceed. Suppliers are indicating they can't get materials. So, but we are proceeding with projects.
Are they putting in change orders associated with that, saying that this was the cost of these measures were not in their original contracts, and are they asking for more money?
We have not seen that yet, but we have sent to our treasurer a letter and a form in which to capture those additional costs associated with COVID-19.
So presumably in some of the CARES funding, states could be capturing that back, either from their governors or from the departments of ed. So if those are coming up, you all want to keep good track of that. And now it doesn't mean that you ask for them that you're going to get it, but I would think that would be something that one would try to estimate and secure. But yeah, no, thanks, Melanie. So Michael Elliott in Oregon.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. So I answered yes to the poll. Am I looped into planning for CARES? I'm kind of sort of. I mean, the Department of Education is very involved in CARES. I was just on a meeting about how can we use some of that funding to help with distance learning. So we're a little bit looped in, but we're not like there in the central discussions. As far as to where we are, our schools closed March 16th to be closed till April 28th, but just this week, the Department of Education has notified districts to start planning for distance learning for all and to start planning for schools being closed for the rest of the school year. Schools are providing lunches to any child under 18 at various sites across the district. So a lot of the classified staff of food service workers, and those employees are still showing up at the schools. A lot of chatter in the maintenance, kind of similar to what was said earlier in terms of, yes, deep cleans going on, but there's also concerns about personal protective equipment for the custodial staff and the cleaners and how that looks. But right now they are being asked to do that. As far as construction, the Oregon order is stated a little bit differently. The list of businesses that were closed was numerated as other businesses can stay open so long as they meet all the social distancing requirements. So construction has not been deemed essential, but it hasn't been closed. So I believe that is still moving forward, but it's moving forward slowly, just to, again, enforce those social distancing requirements. Schools themselves, again, are starting to plan for distance learning. Teachers are coming back. There's a lot of telecommuting. So as far as extending the school year or day, I don't know. I don't know where we go with this distance learning, but I believe it's an attempt to say, we may not have normal school for the rest of the school year. We got to do something else.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, and sorry, I forgot to answer last one. Yes, actually, the Department of Education and districts are specifically tracking COVID-19 expenditures. We've been working through our program budget and accounting manual and our chart of accounts with districts to help them identify ways to do that. And the Department of Education has been given specific instructions on how to code COVID-19 expenses. Sorry about that.
And have you categorized them so that you can identify facilities related COVID COVID expenditures?
I
Like, are
don't
they
know.
showing up in your 2600 codes?
No, I don't think they're showing up in the 2600 code per se. I think because the COVID-19 expenditures can go across various funds and functions, the goal is to track it at like a sub area of responsibility or a different type of index so that they can pull that number and get all the different functions that were affected by the COVID-19.
Right. So, you know, I have to say, as you all come up with these various ways to do this, if you would share them with us, you know, at the National Council and 21st Century School Fund, I think it would be helpful, because I suspect it's going to be a little bit all over the map. And what I'm afraid is that some of the cost implications on the operations and maintenance side might get a little bit lost. So, you know, when you have it, if you want to just shoot it over, I think that might be helpful, and we could begin to collect some of these and then share them back out with everyone. So Scott, are you there from Maine?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, good. I have similar reports as many others. Our schools are closed until May 1st. We are still trying to feed students using buses and such. I think the big thing that we're dealing with now with our projects are the potential delay claims and the lack of being able to get products to the site. It seems to be happening more and more on all of our projects, and that's a potential, real potential issue that we're dealing with. Probably the biggest issue that we're dealing with. Beyond that, construction is moving forward, and it was deemed to be critical and essential, just like other states. But it is entering into a dangerous spot with contractors not being able to get equipment and provisions. The only other thing I've heard a lot of is the labor force, which was really lean up here in Maine to begin with, has been further compromised with this, and that will further promote any kind of construction claims or delays. So that's really the big issue that I would see at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So, and Tim, Sean, can you unmute Tim in Alaska?
Oh, he doesn't. He's doesn't have Mark. Oh, he does.
I had self-muted, but can people hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. I have been having trouble with WebEx audio on my mic on this computer. So thanks, morning, everybody. And for those of you who are further over in the afternoon of the world. Yeah, as far as school operations, we've been, of course, down 1 week prior to our many districts being on school break for the last week in March. And then we rolled into spring break, and coming out of that, the state and school districts have been collaborating to set up distance learning at every grade level. And both my son and daughter-in-law teach here in Juneau, and so I've been able to get a little bit of what's on the ground there, you know, with them as they've been trying to manage the new paradigm. It's very challenging for them. They're both staying home with a kindergartner and a sixth grader that they have in their household, while they're also trying to juggle opportunity to continue their teaching mode and to help their students, their children, who are other teacher students, learn at the same time. So really challenging environment for a lot of our educators, and especially those that are, you know, doubling as, you know, active parents of students and educators as well. Both the state and local districts have rolled out platforms. The state of Alaska has jumped on Florida's virtual school platform and have partnered heavily with Florida in that respect. And some of that, I think all of those costs and avenues are being being tracked at the state level for things the Department of Education and the state board are doing, and districts I know as well for school operations, you know, have also been doing things with increased access of internet. Fortunately, we've had some, internet providers and other people offering free 2 months of internet access. They'll come and install it at your house and sign you up. And then if you don't cancel, then they begin to make some money if you've gotten used to using internet and you never had it before, so that's kind of the business model paradigm for that. But pushing distance learning into, every level of education, including, kinder and pre-K, has been very challenging and interesting for the state. I think that the biggest thing we're seeing on the facilities world, we happen to just by good luck stand up a listserv on March 18th from the facilities section, and that really helped our teams out in the school districts be able to communicate about processes and products. I'll read portion of what I received from one project manager. He says, "I'm proposing for the department to issue a mandate to all state-funded schools to reduce their facility energy consumption during COVID-19 closure." And then he goes on to talk about various mechanisms and whatever. His district would not allow him to shut off fans and to do occupancy-related savings because just of concerns about, aren't we supposed to keep the buildings as ventilated as possible and so forth. So you had districts looking for state mandates to happen, and basically what we were able to do is crowdsource that through the listserv, as various other people said, hey, we're doing this, and we're closing these, we're shutting these down, we got our DDCs, and eventually he was able to show that the norm in school operations was to do unoccupied mode and other things, and so that was really helpful to have a resource for crowdsourcing on that. And I really like your idea, Mary, about us funneling documents we might come across. And one that I just entered into or came aware of this morning was our Department of Transportation and Public Facilities has been working with the Alaska Associated General Contractors organization chapter, if you will, to come up with a set of standardized protocols for construction projects that are going on throughout the state, most of them in remote areas of Alaska that are state funded. And so I haven't had a chance to look at that, but as that rolls out further, they have some more work they're doing on it and hope to have it out by first part of next week. But we did get other questions from this same school district that wrote in about school operations, about closing, about their contractors, because in Alaska, I think different from maybe what a lot of other people might be experiencing, around the country, is your construction projects are probably always on. And what we have up here is a heavy ramp up that's happening right now, where a significant buyout is happening in resource areas like in the lower 48, so to speak, and barges are being prepped and loaded for shipment to offload in June in Alaska, in communities that have said there will be no people allowed into our communities because of COVID. And so there are a lot of questions about contractors who are ramping up for a spring, summer construction season all throughout Alaska, and wondering if, again, whether the departments and the state can issue mandates to require communities to allow them to operate, even though it is allowable under presidential, governor, CDC parameters. Communities, and many of these are communities with 300 people and no hospital within any area except for medevac flying and so forth, which has all been tamped down as well. So that's kind of the big issue in Alaska, is what's going to happen with the construction season. And I do believe we're going to have a lot of project delays and project claims that are happening here.
Right, and I think those are going to be really important for folks to document, because those can be substantial, and there's not, they're not, these budgets aren't set to accommodate them. So, I see there was a question from Barbara Hansberry in terms of the process to access funding. The funding is going to the state departments of education by formula. There is that $3 billion that's going to the governors. I would think in the case of Massachusetts, you would probably be looking at trying to figure out who's going to be the more generous of the two entities. But I might think in Massachusetts, it might be the governor rather than the Department of Education in terms of the construction program. So what I'd like to do now is, I think this has been really interesting and helpful. And I don't know if there are any. I know there are some other states on the call. If there's a state agency person that would like to speak up, you should raise your hand. But then I'd like to take the last 20 minutes and talk about. Oh, there's Amy. So Sean, undo Amy from New Hampshire. There we go. Amy.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Mary. Thanks for having us. I just wanted to add here in New Hampshire that we're all very, very similar stories. But we are starting to see schools incur costs for having their schools opening as surge or isolation or ACS sites, or I guess that's alternate care sites for medical staff for daycares. And so, for example, I think the National Guard went into one of our schools, assessed it, and stated that they needed to upgrade their electrical. I think that cost them $100,000 to do that so that they could bring in proper medical equipment to turn their gymnasium over to a hospital. They, of course, are tracking all those costs and hopefully will get reimbursed by them, but there were no promises made to them in that fact. So that is just something I just wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, that is absolutely, a priority objective of the COVID funding in the CARES bill, and they should keep track of it, because if somehow they can't get it from the Department of Education or from the governor, they should also apply for a grant out of that $600 million that's Department of Education. So they have a few avenues that they could be looking at. So that, I think that'll be something that, frankly, the states might be able to help them with. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in or add anything in terms of what's happening now? Andy, can you? I think you need to unmute yourself. Oh no. Can you, Sean? There we go. Andy from Colorado.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello.
How you doing?
Just making sure you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. The only thing to add, maybe of interest in Colorado, is that the Department of Education has done a survey of community needs, and that's more broad-based, of course, than just facilities, but there are some points in the survey that I understand relate, and what we're really focused on is trying to support that distance learning portion as well. Districts are closed down now, or schools, until the end of April, but the governor has indicated that it'll probably, most likely, will be the rest of the school year. What we're finding is that I think they said 20 to 30,000 requests for laptops or Chromebooks right now to get kids ready for distance learning still. And looking at in our grant program, we have an emergency provision as well, and we're trying to balance, do we dip into our fund balance to help support that, or do we wait to see what other sources of funding, like federal, that might become available? And I thought I'd just share this one other thing. Along with all of the need for devices, there's a lot of conversation about wireless accessibility and routers. And I've heard some rural schools are now asking to put routers in their parking lots so that kids can drive into the parking lot and access the internet and do their schoolwork and then go home.
Yeah, no, we've heard that also, and I think actually I was reading in Maine the community college was trying to work with some of the schools on that as well. Clearly, I mean, there would be a whole other conversation, but the online learning is really not yet working. It's, I think, mostly the fact that our teachers and administrators have relationships with kids, and they've been reaching out by phone and kind of doing what they can, but it's a very rough point. Sean, do you want to unmute Alex for a minute in Maryland? And you might want to share. Can you find him, Alex? Let's see, can we unmute him?
There we go.
There we go.
So a little bit slow to unmute there. No, we have one district in Maryland that has gone to making Wi-Fi available for all for free in the parking lots around the schools, and has publicized that to its families, and probably others will follow suit. Certainly, as everybody gears up for, and as teachers are being instructed to develop using materials prepared by the school districts, additional materials and be available for office hours. So Maryland schools are moving as quickly as they can to sort of virtual model. But also just wanted to note that there is a provision in the CARES Act on specifically continuing payments to employees and contractors during the coronavirus closure period to, I think, help support the economic, fabric of the communities, as well as to keep essential work going on both internally and externally with construction and maintenance. And that's really across the board, and states and districts that do not do that will be at risk in terms of some of the federal funding under the bill.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So what I'd like to do now is sort of move on to stimulus 4. So essentially, I think, and maybe to close out on sort of the CARES Act, I really urge the state directors to start working on a kind of an overview policy memo to their to the chief state school officers and to their governors on really many of the things that we're seeing, and begin to help them get the language and some of the anecdotes that they're going to need in order to make sure that they're including this into their plans and requests for funding, whether it's from the governor or kind of within your agency. We could, take a stab at a template memo with all the blanks, like fill in here for, project delays, fill in here for whatever. But I think, that's going to be something that will be important for governors and chief state school officers to get from their facilities leaders. In terms of the need for school construction stimulus 4, what we know is that to a large extent, school construction can sometimes be a lagging indicator. It doesn't crash instantly, but there's no question that the contraction that we're seeing in the broader economy is going to hit our school facilities and hit it hard. And what we know is that during the last stimulus, there was supposed to be a dedicated fund for school construction, and at the very end, it got pulled out of the stimulus. And at the end of the day, we could see from some NCES data that about $2 billion went into the stimulus from school districts. Actually, Arkansas led the way on spending the most, but in fact, $2 billion was a drop in the bucket compared to the 20+ billion that was, kind of differential in 1 year. And over the course of years, we were looking at, 50, 60, 70 billion that if it had been spending at the national, at its average, it would have been spending, and there was $2 billion, compensation for it. So it was really a big hit. And frankly, I think some of the challenges on deferred maintenance that we're seeing now are a function of that. What we know also going forward is that sales tax, oil and gas, state funding from general funds, and likely property tax decline are going to impact severely in the future. Also, we're already hearing that bond financiers are saying, well, we think this is risky now. So even if the feds got a zero interest rate, the banks don't have a zero interest rate, and they're putting in higher rates, or perhaps even making it hard to get zero interest or low interest debt. The other thing that we heard already is the interruption of work is going to affect with labor, supply chain, companies shutting down, and certainly then costs associated with that. So we know that we're going to be taking a very large hit on this, just as school construction finally kind of climbed up out of the last recession. And so, interested in, what folks are doing. I think that I'm not going to take time to go around on this, because what I'd like to do is get Kevin and Stephen, our folks from the federal government world, to talk a little bit with us about kind of what's happening here in Washington on the stimulus 4. So, Sean, would you unmute? Okay, Kevin is unmuted, and Stephen Ward should also be unmuted. So, Kevin, do you want to start, and then Stephen?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be great.
So, Kevin, you want to go ahead, and then Stephen? You there, Kevin? I know you are somewhere. So, Stephen, why don't you go ahead, since I think I heard you already. Yeah.
Okay, so can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Stephen Ward. Many of you have met me if you've come for the fly-ins. I'm the guy who stands up and 2 or 3 years in a row gave the lobbying 101 exercise, and then accompanied many of the teams as we went to the Hill. So the lay of the land is, I think I'd approach it from two angles. One is, as we know, we've been talking for now almost 3 years about the prospect of an infrastructure bill, a comprehensive infrastructure bill. And our goal has been to make sure that we imposed or included in any discussion an awareness that school buildings are a huge part of our annual spend in infrastructure. They're the second largest spend of all public capital investment, and that they are in dire need of repair, replacement, particularly in those districts that have the lowest tax base, which typically are in inner cities or in the most rural areas. But after the last recession, there's still lots of mid-sized towns that have not fully recovered because the plant that once was there is no longer there. So that's been going on an ongoing basis, and you all that have participated in that laid a foundation for including schools in that discussion. Now we'll come to coronavirus. So we've had 3 phases of response bills that Congress has passed. A couple more focused on the healthcare side. The third, phase 3, or now people this week have been calling them C1, C2, and C3, as in coronavirus 1, 2, and 3. The third one both dealt with some of the endemic problems that are showing up as a result of this pandemic crisis in healthcare, but also put a boatload of money into trying to put a boatload of money back into the community to make sure that small businesses and critical larger businesses don't teeter over and are bankrupt. And Mary talked about those. So that stuff we've already spoken about. So now we come to the discussion of, are we going to have another C4, and what should that C4 look like? And that, frankly, the Democrats in the House, led by the Speaker, are driving that discussion right now with initially looking at about $1 trillion potential investment in infrastructure. Depending upon who you talk to, schools are front and center, or at least they're on the page, or they're still potentially an afterthought. Concurrent to the Speaker driving about $1 trillion conceptual package, the President has indicated an interest in even spending as much as $2 trillion in another round, this one focused on infrastructure. Republicans continue, not as a whole, but in a large block, to want to wait a little bit and see how the results of C3 on the economy, and they're arguing, therefore, so let's sit and let's not drive too quickly to this. Politically, I think, and just responsibly, Democrats are more interested right now in striking while the iron is hot and making sure that, in addition to the very short-term help that C3 provides, that there is now some real serious money going into the broader economy for the recovery, and their focus on that is to spend large amounts of it on infrastructure. So where we sit right now is the Speaker has indicated that she's going to take a lead. She's putting together her package. It's based principally initially on what they showed earlier this year, I think in January, which was mostly a traditional infrastructure bill. But very recently, and what is recently is 3 weeks ago, she did a press conference with Bobby Scott, who is the architect of and prime sponsor of the RASA Act, which would put $100 billion in over 10 years into school construction, renovation, and system replacement, and indicated that that would be a central part of, or that would be part of the next plan. So we are at a critical juncture here where it actually finally looks like there may be a critical mass to do something major on infrastructure. And we are again at a point where all and every voice that is able and willing to talk to their senators in particular, because the House, I mean, I think we need some work on the House to ensure that schools are in, but on the Senate side, we need to convince people, particularly Republicans, that we need a plan now, and schools ought to be a hyper focus of this. And I think unfortunately, we're at a propitious time to be able to make that argument about schools, given that schools are being used for all kinds of things in the near term that they may have been used for partially, but now have become central. And in many cases, they're not being used for what has been central, which is educating kids. So, I'll make one more point. I would say, and Mary hasn't prompted me to do this and may kick me for saying it, but I would say if you've been in town and you've visited any members in the past, or you're at liberty to continue to do so, I would reach out to my 2 senators and make the case that if there's going to be a major infrastructure investment right now, the schools are a great place to do that. A, because of the role that they're playing now. B, because kids are out, and so there's time to start on this. And I would say the third is because we have projects that are readier than a lot of others, and these are among the most labor intensive, as in they put more money into the hands of local workers than virtually any other kind of construction. Kevin, are you live yet, Kevin? And do you want to weigh in?
He's unmuted, but I don't see where he is. But I think thank you, Stephen. And I mean, I think that the point is that it's not, there's nothing that comes just, it's not going to just land. I think that people have to hear from, those who are responsible for the conditions in the public schools. And so the local districts as well as the state officials.
Yep.
And what we will send out to everyone on this call is a memo that we're getting ready to share with the Speaker of the House and other leadership, both on the Democrat and Republican side. We'll share these letters, and you can lift from them, and in order to do your own communications with folks. But it might help sort of with identifying some of the points and issues. But many of you know them yourselves and have had the opportunity to meet with representatives and talk to them about what's going on in your communities. But I think it's really important that we need to be heard. Obviously, nobody's doing visits on Capitol Hill. So, Stephen, why don't you tell us, what's the best way then to reach folks?
So I would say,
if you are wanting to communicate, yeah.
Unless you have a personal relationship with the senator or your member of Congress, you can reach out to their state or district office and ask to talk with the district director in the case of members of the House, and the state director in terms of members of the Senate, and raise the topic. And you could send an email as well. I will tell you, maybe start with an email and ask for a time to in the near term to get on the phone. And I would send talking points, 5 or 6 points if you can. As always, if you've got pictures of the condition of schools that make the case for for the dire need, use those as well. If you've got a governor a governor's office who's paying attention to this and has an interest in the schools, and any way to get them to say something about this, I think that would be useful. My guess is most governors have their hands totally full with responding to the coronavirus.
Kevin, did you have your hand up? Are you there now finally? No,
Kevin's a man never at a loss for words. This is surprising.
No, he is. So there's got to be something else. So, well, I want to respect people's time, but I think that our follow-up will be, sharing with you some things that you can use to help, craft your messages. And if you need some help getting, finding or reaching out to your senators or congressional representatives, please just contact Sean or me at our office, and we'll get help from Stephen and his team. But
guys, can I insert something, Mary, just for a second, so that everybody knows? We plan to take the letter to the Speaker and Leader Schumer, and send it to every legislative aide that's either on the education side or the infrastructure side. And we will do the same, because we're generating a Republican letter as well. We'll do the same for the Republican offices. So the state director or the state or the district director may not have seen that. And it would be useful, I think, because Marriott will share that with you, if you can even forward that letter to the person that you're reaching out to. And if you're not allowed to lobby, I think you could still, if you have restrictions on specific advocacy, forwarding a letter and asking them to recognize the direness of the need is, I would guess, is probably a permissible activity.
And I think also that's part of the reason that I've been encouraging folks to write a sort of an official memo from your perspective and what you're seeing, and sharing it up your chain of command, because for the most part, those then become public documents. And if you're able to do that and then share that, I think that that's going to be something that others who can lobby and will be able to use. And certainly putting what's going on out there is not lobbying. It is essentially, educating the public and your agencies about the impact of this on the operations and management and, long-term capital programs of school facilities. So I think it's just, kind of an important exercise to do. And I think will help all of us as we try to be a clear, more articulate voice for these places that, really are. I mean, you can tell how central they are because you shut them down and everything shuts down. Anyway, with that, I want to close this and thank you all for your time, and hope that everyone stays as safe as you can be in these really, really strange times. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.